I want to start by being precise about language, because precision matters in this story and because the word in the title deserves clarification before anything else. The people I am going to describe as HOA cops are not police officers. They are not law enforcement in any jurisdictional sense. They are not certified, sworn, badged, or accountable to any governmental oversight body. They are specifically a private security patrol hired by the Rudgecrust Ranch HOA to enforce community standards, and they wear khaki uniforms with a patch on the shoulder that says Community Compliance Officer in a font that is designed to convey authority that these individuals do not possess and that the patch does not confer. I am precise about this because conflating private HOA compliance personnel with actual law enforcement is a confusion that benefits certain kinds of people, and that I am not going to participate in, even rhetorically, beyond the quotation marks the title already provides. My name is Gert Lund. I am 48 years old. I am a structural materials engineer. I design things to withstand forces that are trying to destroy them, which is a professional discipline with applications in bridges, buildings, industrial equipment, blast containment, and as it turned out, residential mailboxes. I have a master's degree in structural engineering from Georgia Tech and 23 years of professional experience that includes, among other things, specifying materials for structures that need to survive Category 5 hurricane force winds, seismic events in the Cascadia subduction zone risk corridor, and the kind of vehicular impact scenarios that highway departments model when designing barrier systems. I know what materials fail under what loads and why, and I know how to design things so they do not fail. I live in Rudgecrust Ranch, which is a 70-home HOA development in Parker County, Texas, that was developed in the early 2000s on former agricultural land with the specific aesthetic of what Texas real estate marketing calls ranch-style living, which in practice means larger lots with minimal tree cover, stone veneer on the home's exterior accents, and a community aesthetic code that includes specific provisions about mailboxes. The mailbox provision in the Rudgecrust Ranch Community Standards is detailed. Mailboxes must be mounted on a specified post design. A decorative wrought iron post with a specific cap must be the approved box style from a list of 4 approved manufacturers and must be maintained in a condition consistent with the development standards, which the standards define as clean, undamaged, and properly aligned. I had complied with these provisions since I moved in 6 years ago. I had the approved post, the approved box style, the approved caulk. The mailbox was compliant in every respect and had been from day one. This is the baseline against which everything that follows should be understood. I had done nothing wrong. My mailbox had violated nothing. The community compliance officers, 2 men named Brent and Kyle, based on the first names stitched on their uniform shirts, who drove a white Dodge Ram pickup with Rudgecrust Ranch Community Compliance, stenciled on the door in the same font as the shoulder patch, had been hired by the HOA board approximately 8 months before this story begins. In response to what the board characterized in the community newsletter as a pattern of community standards concerns Rukwarung enhanced monitoring and response. The board had contracted with a private compliance company called Sentinel Community Solutions, which provided the truck, the uniforms, the 2-man team, and a tablet-based documentation system that generated violation notices on the spot. I noticed Brent and Kyle in my first weeks after they started. They drove the development's roads multiple times daily in a pattern that was clearly more about visibility than efficiency, which was either deliberate psychology or poor route planning, and I suspected the former. I did not have a problem with them initially. My property was compliant. I assumed they would do their jobs and leave compliant properties alone. The first mailbox incident happened on a Tuesday morning in November. I came outside at 7:15 to get the mail I had not retrieved the previous day and found my mailbox on the ground. Not knocked over, the post was still standing, properly anchored as it had been. The box itself had been removed from the post. It was lying on its side in the grass next to the post, and the bracket that attached it to the post had been bent, suggesting it had been pulled off rather than unscrewed. There was a Rudgecrust Ranch compliance notice attached to the box with a zip tie. The notice said my mailbox was in violation of Community Standard 12C, specifically that it was visibly damaged and improperly secured, and that it needed to be replaced or repaired within 10 days. I looked at the notice. I looked at the box on the ground. I looked at the post. I thought about the relationship between these things and what sequence of events had produced them. I did not have a camera on the mailbox at that time. I could not prove what had happened, but I had lived in this property for 5 years and used that mailbox without any damage or issue, and now the box was on the ground and there was a compliance notice citing damage. I screwed the box back onto the post, straightened the bracket as best I could, and submitted a written response to the HOA management company, noting that my mailbox had been in good condition prior to this incident and requesting documentation of who had filed the compliance report and whether anyone from the compliance patrol had handled the mailbox. The management company acknowledged my response and said they would forward it to the compliance contractor. I heard nothing further. Second incident happened 6 weeks later in January. This time the box was not just removed from the post, it had been damaged. The front face of the box was dented, a significant dent that would not have occurred from simply being pulled off a post mount. The compliance notice this time cited the damage as an ongoing violation, the same 12C provision, and noted that the box had previously been noticed and not repaired to standard. I photographed everything before touching anything. The dent in the box's face was consistent with an impact from a blunt object, possibly the kind of impact a wrench or tool handle would produce when struck against sheet metal at moderate force. I submitted a written response, and this time included photographs and asked explicitly whether any compliance patrol personnel had been at my address in the prior 48 hours, and whether their tablet documentation system had a record of any visit to my address. The management company said they would investigate. Their investigation produced a letter stating that no compliance violation had been documented by the patrol at my address in the prior 30 days, and that the damage appeared to be vandalism that I should report to the Parker County Sheriff. I reported it to the Parker County Sheriff. A deputy came out, took a report, and noted that without a witness or camera evidence, the report was documenting the incident, but was unlikely to produce an identification. I said I understood. I bought a new compliant mailbox and replaced the damaged one. I also ordered a small weatherproof camera from an outdoor security company and mounted it in the large live oak near my front property line, aimed at the mailbox at a 45-degree angle that captured the full mailbox area and the approach from both directions on my street. I camouflaged the camera housing with a painted PVC cap that made it look like a branch node in the oak's canopy. It was not invisible. Nothing hidden in a tree is fully invisible on close inspection, but it was not obvious, and it was pointed at the right place. The third incident happened in March. I was at my home office when it happened. I work remotely, and my desk faces the window that looks toward the front yard. I did not see what happened because I was at my computer and my field of view from my desk did not include the mailbox directly, but I heard a sound that I registered and then dismissed as a car door, and then, approximately 30 minutes later, went outside and found the mailbox damaged again. The front face had a dent different from the January dent. This one was lower, more lateral, and had a different character of impact mark. The compliance notice was there, same provision. This time the notice added a warning that repeated violations could result in a fine escalation. I went to my camera footage. The footage showed Brent, the taller of the two compliance officers, identifiable by his build and the lettering on his shirt that was legible at the camera's zoom, stopping the Dodge Ram in front of my address at 11:47 that morning. Brent got out of the truck. He walked to my mailbox. He opened the mailbox door, which was the action that had produced the sound I had heard from my office. A car door sound is close to a mailbox door sound at residential distance. He appeared to examine the interior of the box. He closed the door. Then he reached into the cargo pocket of his pants, removed a tool that was not clearly identifiable at the camera's resolution, but was consistent in size and shape with a large hex key or wrench, and struck the face of the mailbox with it twice. He then produced his compliance tablet, photographed the mailbox, and attached a notice to it. He got back in the truck and drove away. The footage was 12 seconds of actual activity, plus the approach and departure. I watched it 4 times. Then I called my attorney, a woman named Donna Hullower who had handled my home purchase and 2 minor matters since, and who I had called because I wanted immediate professional advice rather than action taken without it. I described what the footage showed. Donna said, "Gerpt, is the footage clear?" I said it showed Brent's uniform, the truck, the action, and the compliance notice being placed. Donna said that is documented vandalism by an employee of a company under contract to the HOA, targeting your property, and then creating a false compliance record based on damage they caused. I said that was my understanding of what I was watching. She said, "Don't do anything else tonight. Don't confront him, don't call the HOA, don't post anything. Call me tomorrow morning and I'll have thought through the strategy." I called her the next morning. She said, "Gerpt, you have 3 separate bodies you can go to with this. The Parker County Sheriff for the criminal vandalism, the Texas Attorney General's Office Consumer Protection Division for the false compliance notices, and the HOA board directly for the actions of their contractor. I recommend going in that order. The sheriff first, because the criminal matter establishes the record. Then the AG, because the false notices are a consumer fraud question. Then the HOA, because they need to understand the full picture before you ask them to act." She said, "The footage is your evidence. Make multiple copies before you do anything else." I made 6 copies on 6 different drives and gave one to Donna. Then I went to the Parker County Sheriff. The detective I spoke to was a man named Muckers Teal who had been with the department for 14 years and who looked at the footage on my laptop without expression for the full duration and then said, "Mr. Lund, I want to see this from the beginning one more time." I replayed it. He said, "The uniform is clearly Ridgecrest Ranch Community Compliance." I said yes. He said, "You can identify this individual." I said I knew his first name from his shirt and could identify him on sight. He said, "Do you know if this is the first time, or do you believe there were prior incidents?" I described the November and January incidents and the absence of camera coverage at those times. He said, "Are you aware of any other property owners in Ridgecrest Ranch who have had similar experiences with their mailboxes?" I said I did not know, but I had not asked. He said that was worth finding out. He took my footage, my prior compliance notices, and my written complaint documentation. He opened a case and gave me a case number. He said, "Mr. Lund, I'm going to do some additional investigation before making contact with the compliance company or the HOA." I said I appreciated the care. He said, "This kind of thing, private compliance with this pattern, I want to make sure I understand the full scope before I move." I said I understood. I went home and did what Muckers had suggested. I started asking around. What I found, over the course of the following week through conversations with 7 neighbors, was a pattern that made the 3 mailbox incidents look like one component of a larger operation. 4 other homeowners in Ridgecrest Ranch had received compliance notices for mailbox violations within the prior 8 months, since Sentinel Community Solutions had been hired. 2 of them had also had their mailboxes physically damaged around the time of the notices. One, a woman named Patras Nance, had a security camera that had caught what appeared to be the Dodge Ram parked in front of her address on the morning her mailbox was damaged, though her camera angle had not captured the actual contact. One other resident, a man named Tom Kerr, had replaced his mailbox twice and was on his 3rd one. I brought all of this to Donna Hullower. She said, "Gerpt, this is not an isolated incident. This is a pattern of systematic property damage combined with false documentation for the purpose of generating compliance violation fees." I asked what the compliance violation fees were. I looked up the HOA fee schedule that evening. First violation, warning letter. Second violation, $150. Third violation, $300. My 3 notices were in the pattern of a first warning, a second notice, and an escalation warning, 1 more notice, and I would have faced a $300 fine. Patras Nance was on her 2nd notice. Tom Kerr was on his 3rd and had already paid 1 fine. Dana said the HOA is paying Sentinel for patrol services, and Sentinel appears to be generating the violation incidents that justify their continued employment. This is a self-generating contract. I said that was what it looked like. She said, "Garrett, this is bigger than a mailbox." I said I knew. I said I had been an engineer for 23 years, and I knew what a load-bearing element looked like in a structure, And this compliance scheme was load-bearing for Sentinel's contract with the HOA. Pull it out, and the structure fell. The question was how to pull it out correctly, which was the question I brought with me when I drove to the home improvement center that weekend and spent 45 minutes in the hardware section developing a plan for the most structurally sound residential mailbox installation in Parker County, Texas. Not because I needed the mailbox to be unbreakable as a strategy. Because I needed it to be unbreakable while the strategy ran its course. I want to describe the mailbox installation because the engineering decisions I made are genuinely illustrative of the principle that solving a problem correctly means understanding the forces involved and building the solution to exceed them. The problem was not that my mailbox kept getting damaged. The problem was that someone with a tool was deliberately striking it. The solution was a mailbox that a person with a hand tool could not damage to a degree that would produce the visibly damaged finding required for a 12C violation. This was an engineering problem with a specific load case. Deliberate impact from a handheld instrument at the force a person could reasonably deliver in a single strike. I selected a mailbox from one of the HOA's 4 approved manufacturers, specifically the heaviest gauge model in the approved list, which was a 16-gauge stainless steel rural mailbox with a reinforced door hinge and a locking mechanism. 16-gauge stainless is not easy to dent with a hand tool. The material hardness and the 16-gauge thickness, approximately 1.5 millimeters of stainless steel, absorbs impact energy through elastic and then plastic deformation, but achieving the visible deformation that would read as damaged on a compliance notice requires considerably more force than the same strike on standard 20-gauge galvanized steel, which is what most residential mailboxes are made of. For reference, the approved mailbox I had been using before was 24-gauge, which is approximately half the thickness of 16-gauge and which deforms readily under moderate impact. I had essentially been using foil. The post was the more interesting engineering decision. The HOA's specified post style, the decorative wrought iron with the specific cap, was available in 2 configurations, a hollow post that was set in concrete and a solid core post that was also set in concrete. I selected the solid core option. I dug the post hole myself, to 18 inches rather than the standard 12, and mixed the concrete with a water-to-cement ratio that would produce approximately 4,000 psi compressive strength when cured, which is slightly above residential specification, but within my poor capability as someone who has specified concrete for structures somewhat more demanding than a mailbox post. I used a non-shrink grout at the base of the post before setting it in the concrete, eliminating the slight gap that forms at the post base in standard residential installations, and which is where moisture intrusion begins post-degradation. The bracket system connecting the box to the post was the third element. The approved installation method used the manufacturer's standard bracket, which was 2 mounting screws through the post's top plate. I replaced this with a stainless steel custom bracket that I fabricated in my garage workshop, a 1/4-inch plate with through bolts rather than screws, and a secondary lock bar that prevented the box from being lifted off the post without removing the lock bar first. The lock bar was secured with a tamper-resistant fastener requiring a specific bit pattern that I kept in my desk. The total installation was, by any residential standard, overbuilt. I was aware of this. My neighbor across the street, Dave Barton, watched me work on the installation on a Saturday afternoon and came over and said, "Garrett, what exactly are you putting in that post hole?" I told him the concrete specification. He said, "For a mailbox." I said, "For this mailbox, yes." He said, "You know something I don't." I said I knew some things about material resistance to impact loading that most people don't. He said, "Is something going on?" I said there was a situation being addressed through appropriate channels and that in the meantime, I preferred to have a mailbox that would remain in compliant condition while the situation ran its course. He looked at the installation for a moment and said, "I've had 2 compliance notices about my mailbox in the past 4 months." I said I was aware of the pattern and that Marcus Teal at the sheriff's department was the person to talk to. He pulled out his phone and wrote the name down. Dave was the 8th resident I connected to Marcus's investigation. Marcus Teal's investigation moved with the methodical care of someone who understood that a case involving a private security company with a contractual relationship to an HOA governance body had more moving pieces than a standard property damage complaint. He interviewed the neighbors I had identified, all 5 with mailbox incidents, and found that Patris Nance's camera footage, while not showing the actual contact, combined with a specific timestamp analysis showing the Dodge Ram in front of her address within a 2-hour window around the damage, and combined with my footage showing the actual method, was sufficient to establish the pattern in the department's assessment. Marcus also found something I had not known about. He obtained the compliance records from the HOA management company through a formal request. The management company was not obligated to comply, but chose to rather than become adversarial to a sheriff's investigation, and found that Sentinel Community Solutions had submitted 47 mailbox violation notices in Ridgecrest Ranch in the 8 months since their contract began. For context, in the prior 5 years of HOA operation without a compliance contractor, the total number of mailbox violations in the development's records was 9. Sentinel was generating mailbox violations at approximately 6 times the historical rate. Dana Holloway had been working her own track simultaneously. She had filed the AG consumer protection complaint and had also, through a contact in the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation, requested that Sentinel Community Solutions operating status be reviewed. Private security companies in Texas must be licensed with the TDLR, and their personnel must be individually licensed as security guards or commissioned officers. She obtained the license status for Sentinel's Ridgecrest Ranch contract personnel. Brent was licensed. Kyle was not. Kyle had been operating without a valid private security license for the full 8 months of the contract. That last finding was the accelerant. Dana said, when she called me with this information, Garrett, an unlicensed security guard conducting enforcement activities in a residential community, is not just a Sentinel problem, it's an HOA problem, because the HOA contracted for licensed personnel and received unlicensed personnel, and then relied on their documentation to issue fine notices. I said I understood the liability picture. She said the HOA needs to know this before anyone else does, and they need to know it from us, because if they learn it from the AG or the TDLR without having received prior notice from the affected party, the posture is adversarial. If we go to them first, the posture is cooperative, and they will be strongly motivated to resolve this cooperatively. I said that was the right approach. She said, I'm writing to the board president tomorrow. I want you to review the letter first. The letter was 4 pages. It described the pattern of mailbox incidents, the camera footage of the March incident, the investigation's findings on the historical violation rate, Kyle's unlicensed status, and the specific liability exposure the HOA faced, for the false violation notices, for the fines collected from Tom Kayer and others, for the property damage, and for the negligent contracting of an unlicensed security operative. It offered the HOA a specific and comprehensive resolution path: termination of the Sentinel contract, refund of all fines collected under notices that could not be confirmed to be legitimate, a payment to each affected homeowner for documented property damage, and a public acknowledgement to the community that the compliance program had been terminated for cause. In exchange, the affected homeowners, whose list Dana had prepared and which included 8 properties, would not pursue individual civil actions against the HOA, and the board members who had authorized the contract in good faith would not be named in any complaint to the TDLR or AG except as witnesses. The HOA board president, a man named Gerald Cass, called Dana the day after the letter arrived. Dana told me he had said approximately, I had no idea. She said she believed him. She said the board had been sold the Sentinel contract as a community improvement and had not monitored the violation rate or the documentation practices and had clearly not known about Kyle's licensing status. She said the board was horrified and was convening an emergency meeting. The emergency meeting happened the following Tuesday. The board voted unanimously to terminate the Sentinel contract effective immediately. The board voted to refund all fines collected under the compliance program's mailbox notices, 6 fines total, $350 in aggregate, refunded with a letter acknowledging the program had not operated as the board had intended. The board voted to authorize a damage payment of $300 to each of the 8 homeowners with documented mailbox incidents. The board voted to commission an independent review of all compliance notices issued under the Sentinel contract for any other violation category, which review subsequently identified 23 additional potentially questionable notices and resulted in a further $800 in refunds. Marcus Teal's criminal investigation concluded with misdemeanor criminal mischief charges filed against Brent, the licensed compliance officer whose actions were documented on camera. The charges covered my mailbox incident and 2 others where the pattern and evidence were sufficient for the DA's review. Brent pleaded no contest to 1 count, paid a fine, and served 30 days of community service. Sentinel Community Solutions was referred to the TDLR for the unlicensed guard issue. They received a formal citation and a fine and lost their operating license in 3 counties, including Parker County, for 18 months. The Ridgecrest Ranch HOA hired a new property management review firm, not a compliance patrol, to conduct quarterly property condition reviews, which was a considerably less aggressive approach that produced considerably less drama, and according to Gerald Cass, when I ran into him at the development's summer barbecue 2 years later, considerably better community relations. My mailbox is still there. It has been there through the entirety of the Sentinel operation, through the investigation, through the resolution, through 2 Texas winters and 2 Texas summers, and through every mail delivery since the March incident when it was last tested by a compliance officer's tool and found to be unresponsive to the test. The stainless steel has developed a very slight surface patina that I find aesthetically appropriate. The post remains plumb. The bracket has not shifted. The lock bar is where I put it. I check the installation when I get the mail, which is most evenings. Not because I am expecting a problem, there is no compliance patrol, there has not been one for almost 2 years, and the camera in the live oak has never triggered in a way that required my attention since March of the incident year. I check it because I am an engineer, and checking the things I build is what I do. Load, material, connection, condition. These are the questions I ask of every structure I am responsible for, and the mailbox is the structure at the end of my driveway, and I am responsible for it. It is, as these things go, a very good mailbox. Overbuilt for the application, if the application is simply receiving mail from a carrier who approaches it respectfully and does not attempt to damage it with hand tools. Appropriately built for the application as I encountered it, which included the additional load case. I design for the loads that actually exist, not the ones that should exist in a well-behaved world. This is what engineers do and what, I have come to believe, property owners in certain HOA situations need to think about as well, not just the rules as written, but the forces actually being applied, and whether the structure you have built, whether it is a mailbox or a documentation system or a legal strategy, is adequate for those forces. Mine was. It held through everything that was thrown at it, and when the throwing stopped, it was still standing, correctly aligned, in full compliance with the community standards that had been weaponized against it. Which is all any structure is asked to do in the end.